Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our last stop for today. This, of course, is the Confederate section of the Lexington Cemetery. And around us are buried many Confederate soldiers. This monument here was one of the first that was erected in the South for a memorial to the Confederacy. It was erected in 1874, as you can see the date there, and its symbolism is very important. The broken staff, the battle flag of the Confederacy, and also a broken sword. This is indicative of what we always referred to as the lost cause, and that was a very, very popular legend for many, many years. The lost cause was basically the memory of the Confederacy in the Old South. It is so opposed, of course, to what Mr. Douglas had said to it. This is the other side of it. Many people would say that they did serve just to save their Southland, to save their homes, and we will not argue the point today, either pro or con. But I want you to know that in this modern day, when things of the Confederacy are not as thought as much of as maybe at one time by many people, here in Lexington, over 5,000 people came to the dedication of this monument. That was a huge, huge crowd. And that lost cause became such a symbol of a people who had suffered what most Americans have never suffered: the actual military defeat and occupation of an army. And Kentucky, though it did not officially secede, was actually placed under martial law in 1864 by Abraham Lincoln. And that changed Kentucky's attitude even farther, and that is why for many years no major politician could get to the highest office of this state without either being Southern in sympathy or having actually served as a Confederate soldier. That was the beginning of the Confederate state of Kentucky, you might say. But here on this ground, we do remember a time that is far gone now. And I had the privilege of speaking at the Confederate Memorial Day just this past June. And I thought about the many thousands who came here to that dedication. There were 16 of us at that one. Sometimes we forget, and sometimes we should forget. But it is something that I think all of us should bear in mind, that the people who are buried around this monument believe just as much as those buried at the other side. And we honor them also today. They were brave, they were dedicated, and they suffered defeat. So in that we were gracious, and we are thankful that this country is united once again. But we're going to have at this moment a presentation by someone who represents so much of that lost cause. I told you that many of the men, actually boys, who went to war were barely out of their teens. And especially this young man, whose name is Johnny Green. That young man felt a call to serve what he felt was right and to honor what he thought was right. So it is with great pleasure I present Mr. Johnny Green.
Well, it's been hot the last few weeks, but I reckon it's cooled down a bit. Now, I wonder in my mind if any of you might be headed up towards Kentucky, and I hope that you don't mind that I rest with you a spell for a bit. Still a good ways to Nashville. It's been a while since I've seen anyone out on the road, actually. I guess it's been all this recent heat. No, sir. Sherman and Grant did not leave much to stay for here in the South. But Kentucky is my home. I'm bound for Henderson, and I'm looking forward to seeing my father again. And to sleeping in my own bed again. or any bed for that matter. I reckon I've marched thousands of miles over the past 3.5 years, and now I'm just 150 from home. Well, I'm sorry, I've forgotten my manners. If I have not introduced myself, my name is Johnny Green. I served in the 1st Kentucky Brigade, 9th Regiment, Company B. I was Sergeant Major. Now, I fought with the brigade in just about every battle except Baton Rouge. I was in the hospital because I was sick. But I've just been getting more and more excited the closer I get to home. I've just been gone so long. Well, can you imagine? When I was only 19 years old, marching out to fight for the South in February of 1862, I never would have dreamed that I wouldn't set foot in Kentucky again for 3.5 years. Now, we Kentuckians who fought for the South were cut off from our homes, seeing as the state never seceded. And I'm sure folks back home will wonder why on earth I chose to fight for the South. Well, I believe that the southern states had every right to leave the Union freely and peacefully once they felt that it no longer represented their best interests. Union aggression was unconstitutional, and I will stand by that. And this trip home has been a long one, and at times been dangerous, but I won't complain one bit. Compared to the hardships that come with being a soldier, this trip has been a regular holiday. I remember the first time I saw the elephant, my first battle. It was in April of '62 at Shiloh. That was one of the first mornings I woke up to the sound of regimental drums. And those drums meant we were going into battle. And we tried to prepare ourselves as best we could, but how do you prepare for something like your first time in a fight? We remained in reserve for a large part of the battle, but in a way that was more difficult than just charging into the fray. You see, when those first volleys comes, it sounds like the devil himself is just sawing and hacking at the air, and it gets you restless. All that waiting at the edge of the battlefield, each man alone with his own fears, wondering if he'll be man enough to stand up and fight when his turn comes. Well, we were finally called in, and we charged bravely just as we had done so many times before in our drills. We stayed shoulder to shoulder with the men next to us and 13 inches from the men in front. Now let me be clear. Any battle is just chaos. There's smoke all around, men falling down everywhere, cannonballs flying by so close you can hear them. Now I couldn't make up anything that was going on except what was directly in front of my face. And so I remember I just loaded and fired my gun as quick as my fingers would work. Now, I believe that the Lord has had a hand in saving my life many times during this war. And the first was during the battle at Shiloh. Now, to begin with, initially a ball grazed my head, and I lost consciousness for a good while. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, the litter bearers were taking me to the rear on a stretcher, and they wanted me to see a physician, but there was too much fighting going on for a man to just go to the rear as long as he could still work, and when I woke up, I could still shoot my gun, so I went right back on to fight. But later, I'd taken cover in some bushes to reload, and I was raising my gun to fire when something struck me in the chest. The bullet knocked me head over heels, and I thought, well, this is it. I'm done for. I figured I would only live until the arterial blood started pumping back up to my heart. And so I rose up to my knees, and I took what I thought was my last shot at the Yankees. And then, to my surprise, I didn't die. Well, I knelt back down and I examined myself, but there was no blood. The bullet had passed through the stock of my gun and split in two on the iron ramrod. A piece of the bullet had hit my chest, but it was stopped by my Bible, which I always carried in my jacket's breast pocket. Now, I'm looking forward to eternal life just as much as the next man. Believe me. But I sure am glad I had my Bible to prolong my time in this world. But I did have one more brush with death. It was during the Atlantic campaign towards the very end. We had to make this charge and scale up this high fence while 3 batteries of artillery and the entire Yankee line opened up on us. And I was climbing and I was going over the top, and my canteen strap, it got caught on the top post. And try as I might, I couldn't free myself. I was just hanging there helpless while the Yankees blazed away. And I thought, well, this is it, I'm done for. One of these bullets has my name on it. But every single bullet missed, except the one that grazed my shoulder and cut my strap free. I told you the Lord's been watching over me. I think he's had a hand in seeing me through. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you how many times I saw men blown to bits all around me, and it could have just as easily been me. Or men holding on to the bloody stumps where their arms and legs used to be. You can't know until you experience it just how exhausting the battle can be, not just in your body, but I'm talking about in your head. A lot of times our generals and the Yankee generals too, they would be criticized for not chasing down an enemy who was retreating. But I can tell you today, after an intense fight like Shiloh, I could have no more chased a Yankee down than flown to the moon. And I'm not ashamed to say that I'm glad I won't have to fight again anytime soon. Now, another thing I must say is that we did not know what we were signing up for when we enlisted. We didn't think that the war was going to drag on for years and years. We thought it would be a few months. And a lot of the men had families back home on small farms, and they needed men around to bring in crops and to just keep the place in good repair. So sometimes men would sneak off for a short while to plant crops or just do whatever their families needed them to do so that they could survive. Everyone knew what was going on, and it was generally accepted throughout most armies. We called it taking the French leave. And one young fella, Asa Lewis, he was no different. His family had managed to get him a letter saying they needed his help, that they were starving. Well, Asa Lewis, he'd only signed up to fight for 1 year, which had come and gone. And he requested a furlough to go and help his starving family, but he was denied. Well, Asa Lewis, he'd fulfilled his obligation and his family needed him. So he left with every intention of returning. But he was captured and brought back a few days later. Now we needed every man we could get, so Asa, he wasn't punished, he was just given a warning. But I reckon it must be hard to ignore your family if they're starving and crying out for you to help them. Asa Lewis, he left again, and once more he was captured and brought back. But this time our head general, General Bragg, took it upon himself to set an example for anyone else who was thinking about running off. Asa Lewis was sentenced to death by firing squad. General Bragg insisted that discipline be enforced. 12 men were assigned to the firing squad, and they were each issued a rifle. But only 11 out of the 12 guns had bullets in them. I guess that way each man could think that maybe his gun wasn't the one that shot Asa, to ease their conscience. And I'm glad I wasn't one of them. Asa, he knelt 50 feet away from the firing squad, and the lieutenant in charge gave the command, ready, aim, fire. They fired. They shot him December 26th, day after Christmas. I guess Bragg's gift was killing one of our own for trying to feed his family. It's hard serving a long time under a man that you don't respect. Now, I don't know where Bragg's going when he dies, but if he somehow manages to make it up into heaven, it won't do him any good. He'll fall back in 3 days for a better position. Now, we would have followed General Henson, General Helm, or General Breckinridge to hell and back, but Bragg, I don't reckon none of us would have spat on him if he was on fire. He seemed to hold all of us Kentuckians in contempt. I guess because he expected more support from our state, more manpower than it gave him. But we men in the 1st Kentucky Brigade showed him nothing but complete obedience, regardless of our lack of faith in him. Time after time, he put us in the worst places. And the absolute worst was the battle at Murfreesboro, Stones River. What happened was we were fighting the Yankees and we were pressing them back towards the river. General Bragg assumed that they were retreating, and he ordered General Breckinridge's division to pursue them. But what you have to understand is that on the other side of the river there was a large hill, and it hid any additional reinforcements from view. And there was fighting going on upstream that we didn't know a whole lot about. Now, without any more information, it seemed reckless and even suicidal to pursue them. General Henson had to be restrained from finding General Bragg and attacking him when he heard the orders to charge. And he was right to be angry. On the other side of the river, there was Union artillery that was in perfect range of the retreat path. So, about the time the Yankees hit the river, 60 Union artillery pieces started raining shell on our boys. About the same time that started up, more Yankees from upstream came into view, and they just poured the lead in. You know, our line of attack didn't stand a chance. We halted and just fell apart. 4,500 men went in on that charge. 4,500. 45 minutes later, 2,800 came back. General Henson died from the wounds that he received there. All Breckinridge could do was just watch the slaughter and horror. But later, General Bragg tried to pin the blame for that fiasco on General Breckinridge. He insisted that he had ordered Breckinridge to attack earlier, when it would have been safer, when there would have been no artillery or reinforcements. On the contrary, General Breckinridge had requested permission from General Bragg to attack, but Bragg never gave it to him. General Breckinridge simply refused to assume the responsibility that only belonged to the commander-in-chief, Bragg. Bragg was the one who would not take responsibility, and time after time he would do that. He would try to pin the blame for his failures on us Kentuckians, and in the end we held him in complete contempt. Now, once President Davis, he visited us. He was reviewing all the troops, and as he rode by on his horse, all the units in the Army of the Tennessee, oh, they cheered, they threw their hats. But our group remained silent. And that wasn't out of disrespect to President Davis, but General Bragg was one of the men who rode with him. We didn't want him to think for a second that we respected him any longer. He wronged us far too many times. But General Breckinridge, we would have followed him anywhere. In the summer of '63, he was ordered to defend Vicksburg. And he said that he wanted to take us with him to fight because we were the best that we had. But he said we needed to decide amongst ourselves if we would follow him. You see, he knew and we knew that if we stayed with General Bragg, we stood a chance of invading Kentucky, which we were desperate to do. So we had a choice. We could maybe stay with General Bragg, who we didn't like, but maybe see our homes again. Or we could go with General Breckinridge for another summer of marching through the hot sands of Mississippi. Now, we wanted to see our homes dearly, but we weren't about to abandon the man who had always looked out for us like a father. We went with Breckinridge. Now, I told you we would have followed him to hell and back, and with the heat that summer, we may as well have. But as bad as it got, I'm proud to have fought and fought well, and I wasn't ready to quit fighting. We didn't think we were licked. A lot of the men thought we were going to hide out west to regroup and continue the fight. We went to war for a lot of reasons. I believed in the state's right to leave the Union freely and peacefully. It wasn't right for the North to coerce the South into returning. It was an act of fratricidal aggression, pure and simple, and unconstitutional to boot. I don't think I could have lived with myself if I hadn't stood up and fought for what our founding fathers had fought and died for, which was constitutional government. Now, I've heard some Northerners and Yankees say that we went to war for slavery, but most of us didn't fight for slavery. A lot of us didn't own slaves. It was usually just the officers. You want to know what I was doing when the war broke out? I was working as a clerk in Alabama. My father sent me there to take care of his brother, Robert, who is handicapped. Every morning, I shaved and bathed Robert because he is helpless as a baby. You wouldn't put yourself through what I went through for something that you could never have. By the end, only a fool couldn't see the handwriting on the wall that spelled doom for the Confederacy. We just didn't have the manpower to keep fighting. Lord knows that wasn't a problem for the North, they had a never-ending supply of Yankees. And towards the end, we had to defend this bridge over the Oconee River in Georgia. And we were so desperate for reinforcements that we recruited boys from a nearby military academy and convicts from a local prison. Boys, criminals, and old men. That's what the war reduced us to. But we didn't just run out of manpower, we ran out of everything. Anytime we raided a Yankee storeroom, they had anything we could possibly want. Whereas we rarely had enough of anything. Food, water, clothing, tents, ammunition, or even just enough guns for every man to have one. Some of the men started the war off with nothing but big old hunting knives that they carried at their sides. Once we marched through a little town in Mississippi and we walked by a blacksmith shop and I looked over and he was hammering out all these old-fashioned spears and pike heads. And I broke out of line and I went over and I struck up a conversation with him. I asked him what he was making all those old spears for, and he said that they were for our men who didn't have guns. We sent men into a war of firearms and artillery with spears. Well, when Lee finally surrendered, what was left of the brigade was in Washington, Georgia. I was discharged, given $2.50 in silver to my name, and I started making my way home with a group of others. I will not forget the kindness that was shown to me on that journey. Even though the land we walked through had been devastated, people always managed to find enough food to spare us something to eat at the end of every day. It seemed that everyone had lost a loved one to the war. But what struck me most was that nobody would take my money, my good silver. I always offered it, but nearly everybody refused. Most folks are good. I can see that even in the Yankees. Sometimes I would trade them some of my tobacco for a cup of their good coffee. Other times, if you were standing out on picket duty at night, you could hear a Yankee band playing off in the darkness. And sometimes, to be clever, I'd shout out a request. But a minute later, they'd be playing it for me. We were young men, far from home, fighting about what we thought was right. We just had different beliefs. I'm not sure what I'm gonna find when I get back to Kentucky. I'd like to pick up where I left off if I can, but I'm not the man I was when I left. How can you go through a war and not have it change you? I've been keeping it all in this journal. My children and my grandchildren can hopefully read this. Maybe they'll know just how much we Kentuckians sacrificed to fight for the South. Well, I've been idle long enough. If I keep pressing on, I should be home soon enough. I would like to thank you kind folks for letting me pass the time with you. I hope you have a safe journey and Godspeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. You know, war is a terrible thing. And when you look at young soldiers going off to war, you always remember it's the old men who send the young men to die in wars. But the Civil War, the war between the states, as we used to like to say in Kentucky, is it any wonder that it is referred to by many historians as the American Iliad? It's our great adventure. It's our great defining moment. And it's something we must never, ever forget. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for being with us today on this rather chilly walk, but I think it has been most pleasurable. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I want to thank very much the Kentucky Humanities Council for sending these very, very learned people amongst us and giving us a taste of what history was firsthand. And it has been my privilege for several times now to do this history walk. I always find out every time more and more and more about our glorious Kentucky past. And so when you leave here, I hope you leave with some knowledge, some information, some enjoyment, and for goodness sake, go have some hot chocolate. Thank you very much.